I think for me, it was, if I was feeling things, my life would have to collapse.
Oh, yeah.
And it was only after I made the choice to make all those changes that I could recognize that.
So yeah, I guess welcome to Kodsnack, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I think for people outside, you're possibly likely most well known for creating the language Elm, but you've also gone quite a big journey in other ways as well.
Yeah, so I've been working on Elm for almost 15 years now, more than 10. I don't know. It's hard to. I have to do the math.
Yeah,
but I think one of the most interesting things about working on a project for that long is kind of the personal aspects of it that people might not see just from seeing, I saw the blog post now and then about this language.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff that I thought it might be interesting to focus on for some people who are interested in languages or just working as developers at some company was just like some of these turning points in working in open source and working on a project for so long and working in the public eye.
Yeah.
So one thing that stuck out to me is like might be surprising to people is like when I first started on this project, I was living in San Francisco, and in theory, it's the exciting epicenter of all this stuff.
Oh yes,
but for me, it really was like a culture clash. I wasn't supposed to be there on some level, and so I had this like numb feeling of like, in theory, things are going well. You know, I have a job that's nice and my colleagues are nice, but nothing's really fun and nothing's really bad. Everything's just nothing.
It's just checking the boxes.
Yeah. And even when I was working on Elm, living in San Francisco, somehow that like professionally, it's like, this is my dream work of what I really want to do. But somehow it still feels like nothing.
Yeah.
And so like escaping from that has been like a 5-year journey by now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So how long were you in San Francisco for?
Well, after I got out of school, where I did my my undergraduate thesis work was on Elm, and I moved to San Francisco under the theory that I'll work there for a year or two, and then I'll go back and do a PhD. And I kind of knew in my heart that being in an academic path was like, I was well suited for that. But I also felt that I would meet people who were in the PhD programs, and I was like, these ideas don't seem to connect to like reality. I've never really been to the real world, but I'm pretty sure it's not like that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so the theory was, I'll go out there, I'll see what it's like. Probably won't be for me. And then I'll come back and I'll be more connected.
Yeah.
And what's funny is like all the academics say, if you go out there, you're going to get used to the money and you'll never come back.
Yeah.
I didn't have that problem. Within 6 months, I was like doing my GREs. I was ready to go back to get a PhD. I was like, this is not right for me.
Yeah. Talk about going in with open eyes.
Yeah. But so what happened was this company, Prezi, said, hey, we really think your work on Elm is cool. Do you want to work on it full time? And suddenly there was this like third path that I hadn't looked at. And I was just like, is this even real? Like, how, like, why are you offering? Yeah. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. What's the hook?
So I ended up doing that, and I've been on that path for ever since. And it turns out when someone offers you something that's like, what's going on here? It's like, it is likely to be pretty confusing. It took me a long time to work out like, wait, how did I end up here? Where?
Yeah. but so you started doing Elm full time then?
Yeah, so that would have been, I think, around 2014 or 13. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that whole arc of like working with companies who were interested in Elm and supporting Elm is very interesting in that I kind of imagined, the path for this sort of thing is like, you look at Python and you look at Guido van Rossum, who weirdly, the Dropbox offices were right across the street from where I worked in San Francisco. So I actually got to chat with him a few times.
Oh, cool.
And I think that kind of made me a little bit like feel to some extent, the path is the path that Guido did. And whatever happened in the 90s, whatever was culturally true then is still culturally true. And like, I really believe in my language. So my language is like Python, and things will go that way if I do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the way it should be moving, sort of.
Yeah, and I think with the passage of time and experience and seeing, I just think a lot of things are slightly different in ways that I was maybe naive or hopeful about.
Mm.
Where it's like, I think the culture of how people felt about open source stuff in the 90s and early 2000s is quite different than today.
Mm.
Just in that I think some companies, there's some ratio of companies who see it as like, hey, this is something that we should support, or there's some value here. And another set that says, hey, something's for free, we should take it. It's a competitive advantage if we take it. And I don't know what are the ratios, but it feels like more towards free things should be taken.
Oh yeah, it's there for us. It's a natural resource or something.
Yeah, so I think that's a little bit of a cultural difference where I mean, maybe it was exactly the same, I'm not old enough to say, but another aspect is like, I mean, to think that you're going to be Python is just a crazy thought. I didn't think it in my head like, oh yeah, that's me. But I think to be like, oh, that's a path that exists is like, yeah, that's a path that exists like once.
Yeah. 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 It's like when Douglas Adams talked about wanting to be John Cleese. And it's like, it took me a long time to realize the post was already taken.
Yeah. So I think that was essentially that kind of gets into when I couldn't really make it work in San Francisco anymore. So like part of the realization for me was like living in San Francisco, I really felt I was doing it for Elm. Like I was there because I felt it was good for Elm. And I knew 6 months in, I can't live here. This isn't for me. There's no future for me here. But I ended up living there for 5 years more. And so ultimately it kind of got to a point where it's like, I need to put my own like health or, physically or mentally, at least on an equal level with this language.
That, of course.
And on the one hand, it's like, it was so like exciting and satisfying to work on it. But after enough time, the other costs were sort of accumulating with like health and life and all these other aspects. Yeah. So there was actually a funny turning point with this, which is I was at a conference that had it was kind of an academic and industry crossover. So they had a bunch of language creators there. So I met Brendan Eich of JavaScript and some of the Rust people were there. Nice. But the talk that I saw that really I remember clearly was with the creator of C++, Johannes Drostrup. Yeah. I don't know if I'm saying it quite right, but
it's close. That's for sure.
But he gives this 1.5-hour talk about the beginnings of C++ and all the decisions that were made and why they had to be made that way. And, I came in kind of being uninformed about it or just kind of knowing the cultural temperature on how people feel about it. And I came out being like, wow, it really is clear like why these decisions needed to be this way. And there were other academics at the conference. So I was talking to someone who's like, oh yeah, I knew someone whose office was like right across from his at Bell Labs. And he was working on a typed functional language. And it's just like, to me, it was like, there's so much of timing. It's not like, oh, why did that one take off and this one not? It's like, we don't have to wonder, oh, why wasn't someone doing it? Someone was doing it, but it had to be a certain way for it to take into the industry. So he does this talk. It's really persuasive. It's really interesting. And at the end, there's like all the questions. And someone is like, someone who's like maybe still in college or maybe just out of it and is like, why don't you do things more like Rust? Or it just started, and it's just like, we just did 1.5 hours on like why everything had to be how it is in a historical context.
Were you here?
And it's like Rust exists because of this. It just was such an insult to the whole like life work of this man. I felt that I came out of that talk being like, man, if I get so dedicated to this project that, one day I can stand on a stage when I'm 50 something or 60 something and still there's some 23-year-old being like, what about like, your work has been so great. Why isn't it like the people you've influenced? And it's just like, I was like, okay, I need to have a richer life than just this project. And so that was actually a big turning point for me in like being able to like take seriously sort of personal things or my own well-being in a way that I think can be quite hard with open source projects where like there's an image of you as like a name that accompanies this technical product, and
this is you.
Yeah, it's like you exist only to the extent that you benefit that technical project, according to
and of course that's all you do and all you want to do, because look, it looks successful from the outside. It must be great.
Exactly. Yeah, it must feel great to do all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's also another thing that's tricky with the open source work, is that it is so enjoyable to do the technical work, and then other aspects of it can be really difficult in surprising ways, in ways that you didn't necessarily like sign up for.
Yeah.
Like the public figureness of it, I don't think I was ready for. Like I never, coming from a academic background, it's kind of like, this is an idea I'm excited about.
Yeah.
But I didn't personally want to be perceived or like a subject of conversation.
No. It's the idea we're here to talk about, right?
Yeah. But yeah, so that has been something that's been interesting to adjust to as well. And I think for people who've followed Elm stuff, they'll have seen that one of the ways I've kind of tried to deal with, I don't know if this is true, but I've noticed that if you enter information into the internet, it becomes possible to discuss it. And there's something about the internet that, like, if you're not inputting the information, it becomes like unaddressable. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like there's something of like, the more you put yourself into it, the more it becomes able to talk about you.
That makes sense. Yeah, it rings a bell somehow. It's like if there's nothing about it on the internet, it's like, it must be in my mind. It doesn't really exist.
Somehow the internet, I feel like, I don't think this is true in all cases, but like it becomes more difficult for it to become a topic. And I think that's a very like, simplistic view of like how these things work, but in a way it's quite a practical approach to say, okay, in my particular story, Elm was going quite well and lots of people were coming, and I kind of had learned all the tricks of here's how you write the blog post and get new people checking it out. And when new people come to check it out, some fraction is going to really like it.
Yeah.
Some fraction, I think just through preferences, is going to say, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
And some fraction of them is going to say, this isn't for me and it's your fault. I don't personally agree with that. I think, there's lots of technologies that suit all sorts of different personalities and preferences. And I love that.
Yeah.
And I also feel that like, I would be sad if all the technologies tried to appease everyone and be for everyone.
Yeah, sad world.
So that all was going well, but to a point where the trade-off between like doing serious work on a compiler was trading off against sort of the public figure expectations of like, are you able to respond to this volume of like, let's just say incoming inquiries, where it's like, will you look at this code? Will you think about this feature, et cetera, et cetera. And I think in a traditional work setup, that increase in amount of people checking out the project would have correlated with an increased amount of ability to handle that volume.
Yeah.
And in the open source setup I was in, there was no connection.
Yeah.
It was just like, there's a company that's supporting my work, and that's good for them for certain reasons. And so at some point I kind of came to them and I said, hey, I'm getting crushed here. Like, I can't do everything anymore. And like, I've been under a rock for a long time, but it's really past the point now. Like, what's my future here? Like, will I ever have a colleague, or is it just me?
Yeah.
And the answer was like, it's just you. Like, that's the path. So I think that was a big turning point for me in sort of saying, okay, I need to, if I'm going to continue this, I need to continue in a way such that that decision can't be made by someone else. Like, I need to put myself in a spot where, like, as more people show up, there's enough people working with me that we can handle everything together. So, but that was quite a turning point. And
That's really fascinating. I mean, I guess in a way it's perhaps worse that you got paid for doing the work for quite a while, because it enabled the pressure to sort of build up for longer. Because look, I'm being paid to do this full time. Oh, surely there's a bit too much coming in, but I can get ahead of it or something. I'm doing this thing that everyone seems to think should be like a wonderful position to be in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like in the, Python mythology, it's like, well, if you just go on the path long enough, well, you're going to end up at Google and Dropbox or something. So,
Yeah.
So, and I do want to say, like, I have strictly gratitude towards the companies that supported the work through these years.
Of course.
I think looking back, I do feel like I kind of take it as like I was naive about what the possibilities were, and I should have been doing this sort of like scaffolding organizational work, I don't know, like 4 years earlier than it really was like, oh,
yeah,
I need to figure this out.
Yeah.
So, but a part of doing that was like at some point, San Francisco had gotten too powerful for me. I couldn't do it any longer.
Too much radiation.
Yeah. So I ended up moving to Boston, where I had gone to school and I had a lot of friends there. And it was only after I moved that I could kind of like feel the emotions or like understand what I was feeling in San Francisco. Because I think in a way it would have been too catastrophic to my life if I felt those emotions.
Yeah.
Like looking back at that time, I can say, oh, the solution for me was like, I kind of needed to leave and that there's no real other way to solve these issues.
Yeah.
But if you're living in a place to acknowledge that emotionally or consciously is like such a catastrophe. It's like, okay, I can't live here. I need to move all my stuff. It's like my job. I'm not going to do it that like there.
Yeah. Everything needs to go sort of, or it's up in the air.
And so I have a theory that part of that feeling of numbness that I know some other people in San Francisco that I knew had that feeling of like, I can go on this vacation. I can do this or that. And it's just like, doesn't feel anything. I think for me, it was, if I was feeling things, my life would have to collapse.
Oh, yeah.
And it was only after I made the choice to make all those changes that I could recognize that. So it took even then, after maybe like a year into living in Boston, to really like unpack, I had sort of taken in these cultural norms and things that I would read people saying online. It's not that I'd come to believe them, but rather that I could predict them. And so my thoughts were in conversation with that.
Oh, it goes so deep.
Right. So like when it comes to like making choices on Elm stuff, it was like, yeah, I had like, I don't know if internalize is the right word, but like that train of thought was accessible to me and I could interact with it.
Yeah.
And in moving away, I was able to like have that kind of diminish, which I think was good, because I mean, the language didn't come from being embedded in Silicon Valley culture and entrepreneurship and we're gonna change the world. It's like, are you gonna change it to be good? No, we don't think about we're changing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So getting more into a setting where I think people were interested in a wider range of things, and it just felt more like I was valuing my own health as well.
Yeah.
But from there, after that, I ended up moving to Denmark. My wife is Danish, so that was another step on that same thing. It's like, I never looked at that way now that I have some distance from living in the States.
Yeah.
But so that travel has been very interesting. And I think I'd say to people who are, I don't know, it's something to take seriously. I really am happy that I made those moves. And it's like clear that I paid a price professionally to do that. But I think for me, it was the right path.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what really counts. But that's what enables new exciting stuff to happen as well. Yeah,
exactly. And I think one of the cool things now that we're living out in Denmark is just like the excitement that I had in 2012 for this project that I was just starting.
Yeah.
I have that kind of excitement again.
Yeah. So that's fantastic
for what I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I just think the results are going to be so much better from that. And like, I also like through the 10 years of kind of understanding the ins and outs of open source, like funding and organization, like I'm in such a better place to resolve those in a good way. Maybe probably not a generalizable way, but
no, but that's kind of the point as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is your way.
Yeah,
this is the way that makes you feel good and makes you do exciting stuff. Surely that's the more important thing.
I mean, if you go and read online, it's big debate about that.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's like you said, the Bjarne's path and the Guido's path, they're not generalizable. You had to be there.
Exactly.
And if you create a context where you have to be you to be where you are now. That means you can create something that no one else will do either.
Yeah, and I wonder if there is, maybe it's with everything, but I wonder with programming languages in particular, is it like there's simply not a reproducible path?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I'm trying to think, because it is like, there are things to notice about it where, at least until the last decade or so, it was very uncommon for a language to come from California, which I found interesting, like where this is kind of like the hub of all this work.
Yeah.
The language has not come from there, which isn't true anymore, obviously. But at the time, I wondered if like the ethos of like kind of, one could call it move fast and break things. Others might call it reckless indifference to consequences.
Yeah.
Like in a consumer product, that can be quite workable because like the cost of a change and the change back isn't so, I mean, it's there, I don't want to discount that when Facebook changes their UI that there's a backlash.
Yeah.
But with programming languages, it's like you really don't have that same leeway. And so my own feeling is that like you can't really move that fast. The work takes a long time, and it doesn't really have the like force magnifying effect that if you bring in 100 people that you get like more programming language necessarily. Like a lot of the
exactly.
A lot of the challenges with compilers in particular, I feel is like, can I fit all this information into my head long enough to like get the algorithm out?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't like, if someone's writing a type inference algorithm, if anyone's tried it before, I don't know what having like 10 people on it would like.
No.
I would find that more stressful personally, and it's hard enough.
Yeah. We interrupt this broadcast with a quick thank you to all our sponsors on Coffee. You too can become one by visiting ko-fi.com/kodsnack, KODSNACK, and making a one-time or monthly donation. If you support us with €5 or more per month, you get some very, very nice stickers in the mail. And if you support us on the barista level for €10 or more per month, you also get a huge thank you right here. Thank you, Andreas Legell, Brother Ingo, and Tobbe Lundberg. And remember, you're a fantastic person whether you support us with money or not. Yeah, I mean, it feels like that kind of move fast atmosphere is not conducive to build something which you're building in order to build other things on top of over time. I mean, it's like building infrastructure in general. I don't know if the SF area or Silicon Valley is known for doing that super well either.
Yeah, so I don't want to make a big judgment because I also appreciate like there is an element of taste in it where it's like you can, with a language, like if you take the policy of let's add everything, you can quite quickly do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, just historically, I think that's the most adapted approach. Like one of the things with C to C++ was everyone who's using C is already using C++.
Yeah.
You're just not using my compiler for it.
Yeah, sure.
And like that approach with like JavaScript and TypeScript, and I think it's like hard to argue that it's an incredibly powerful approach for gaining a very broad user base very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
But I think my view is kind of like, I would hope that languages have a bigger diversity than that niche, or like that we should all compete to fill that one lane feels.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're able to add stuff quickly and push for adding stuff quickly, you will go really wide. And then you're pretty much guaranteed to have stuff that doesn't gel or doesn't have a coherent feeling to it and stuff like that.
Well, I think I have this concept that I think helps explain it, is that I split languages, and this isn't a perfect division, into platform languages and productivity languages. And I think a lot of the most popular languages are platform languages. And the idea there is like, say I'm Apple, my goal overall is like, I want as many people as possible making iPhone apps and doing financial transactions through the App Store.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the goal, right? And there are all these technical details like, oh, I have to make a programming language now to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And so in that context, going for an approach of, we have all these businesses, and essentially we want them to get access to the hardware, and we want them to do it in the way that they want, that they can run their business how they want. So if we give them everything that's come out of language research ever, they can have a style guide in the company, and they can work it out amongst themselves what is the part of this language that they want to use. And a side benefit of that is that when there's a dispute about what should and shouldn't be in the language, it happens within that company. That's a dispute between colleagues.
Yeah.
As opposed to a dispute with Apple of like, hey, you should have this feature. So it has this very interesting, like, the debate turns inward away from the platform.
Yeah, we have the platform. It's sort of a given.
Yeah.
And what do we want to do with the tools provided?
And so in my view, there's I think a kind of a separate category of language, which is a productivity language. And the point there is we're going to exist within these platforms, but we're going to curate a set of features and packages and an experience such that for some companies, for some people, they're going to get additional productivity above and beyond. Well, everything's there, make it work. And that's kind of, I think, part of why in Elm, there's such an effort of like, how do we take things like Hindley-Milner type inference that, it was figured out in the 70s, but in a way, when you have this distinction between a platform language and a productivity language, it's not a good fit necessarily for a platform language because, well, we want to cover every single scenario that can exist in a business in the world. Yeah. Because we want them to come through us. Yeah. So I think that's part of where it comes from, this feeling of like, I wouldn't want everyone to try to go the let's be the biggest possible language. Not because I have anything against that, but because there's other ways too, and those ways inherently will be more niche.
Yeah, exactly. You can explore the niches more deeply and find stuff that wouldn't have come up otherwise. And what if you build the whole thing around this idea instead? What does it mean?
And I think, I forget the name of the talk, but there's I can't do it justice. It's a Gary Bernhardt talk about like building things where you have a very simple core and you get more and more complexity as you build layers around that. And the sort of ethos around building software is like the easy stuff should be easy and simple. And then when I need, some SIMD operation or some GPU thing, it's like that is a layer around that. I don't want that in my in the easy stuff. And that's kind of, I hope, how my work on Elm and stuff can serve as that core, but it doesn't aim to be like the whole picture. At some point it's just better to use Rust or C. And I don't imagine that what I make will ever compete with C in terms of efficiency or
No, if people are after C, they should probably use C. It makes sense.
And I think I've been doing more of it recently, and it's great fun. So,
it's a good...
sometimes it's not as charming, but a segfault every once in a while it's good fun.
Yeah, we can get into your own specific niche of it as well. I mean, I think about it sometimes as a lot of tools and stuff people build. They build it to solve like the general problem of something, which is a fun project in itself. But nobody has the general problem. I always have the specific problem.
Well, and that's really how, like, my application of things with Elm has always kind of been, I really became an enthusiast for type functional programming because I was lucky that I had professors that taught me standard ML and OCaml. And then outside of class, I was learning Haskell. And I kind of had come from like, hey, I make little games at home for fun. But with these languages that I love using, I can't make the things I want to make. And so my feeling was always like, if we can take the best of this whole world of research and make it really easy to apply to these practical problems, that would be really exciting.
Yeah.
And over time with Elm, I was kind of like building a trust that if I only have the tools of, lambda calculus, algebraic data types, and type inference, anything is possible. Like in theory, that's true. It's the lambda calculus. Anything is possible.
Yeah.
But it was like, is it really true that if I stick with just these three things, a nice solution will come out if you're patient enough?
Yeah.
If you keep looking.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that it took a long time to really believe that that's true. But
yeah.
And I also have to be someone who's saying like, let's wait and see. Like if we wait a little bit longer, I think it'll arise. We'll figure it out. But yeah, so it's not a popular thing to do always, and I see why Apple or Google or Microsoft wouldn't take that approach. And they just say, let's do it. Let's do every style and then it'll work itself out in practice, which is, that works as well.
It does produce certain types of results. Maybe not all.
Well, the results you're looking for are still in there. Like you just have to
filter a bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's this mindset of, I want to combine these ideas, and I sort of seeing how it works out or thinking it through and waiting until it fits even. So is that something? Have you sort of always had that mindset, or is it something you sort of picked up along the way, or is it evolving? Or
I think, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it exactly in that way. I think with a language in particular, it feels very high stakes to change it.
Yeah.
So like even very early on, I think there would have been like 100 people, some very small amount of people using the language. In the very first versions, I did strings just like in Haskell, which is to say, not correctly. The approach was, wouldn't it be neat if strings were lists of characters?
It makes sense. Yeah.
And each character can be a 32-bit, the Unicode code point.
Yeah.
And so to represent ABC, well, we'll have our linked list that has the pointer to the next one and the next one, and then the Unicode code points, those are going to be boxed, so we have a pointer to that.
Oh.
And so like instead of using 8 bits to say, hey, it's the letter A, we're using like 128 or like a crazy amount of space.
All of it.
Yeah. And so I was like, man, I know it's not the right choice to stick with this linked list, but like, it feels like there's all these people who are using it and expect it to be a certain way. And so I think even then, like after I changed it, it was kind of like, I kind of had this feeling is like the best time to change it is now because there's fewer people looking now than there would be.
Yeah.
So it's like now, if you're going to make a change, like now is the time. But I don't know. I think just with compilers in particular, like it really feels high pressure to make decisions like that. Cause like you can't bring in everybody who's using the language. And it's going to have different effects for all different people and all different perspectives. And so I think if you like just say, oh, then, I mean, maybe it'd be fine. I couldn't do it. Though.
No. Maybe someone else could. It's their power.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, though, it reminds me. So I can't say this in the most tea spilling way, but there was a time when the Elm architecture was getting some popularity in other parts of the world and seeing it was influencing JavaScript projects. And for reasons that I know, people were curious, like, how do we do an effect system that integrates with this virtual DOM stuff in a nice way?
Yeah.
And some people had reached out to me in particular to say, hey, how are you going to do it? And I felt a little funny about that based on the particular citations of crediting work in the past. So I said, I want to keep this to myself so that if someone's going to copy this work, at least I'll get to publish it first. Right? Because like, I think that was at that time, like, I just felt like, okay, if I have a whole open design discussion about this, it'll just appear in these other places and it'll kind of like, I won't be able to do it fast enough to match like JavaScript speed.
Oh, yeah. You can't go all directions at once.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the times I paid the biggest like reputation costs, is because I had designed this effect system that I really thought was an improvement. And I think anybody using Elm today would agree that like that release was like a big step from being a niche, interesting idea to being like, oh, this is practical and easy to use. But since that time, I had a reputation for like, oh, he might make a big breaking change. And I think it was like that particular like personal psychological thing of like, I don't want that person to like rip me off, which I don't mind. It wasn't as like, I don't mind, but I want to publish it.
Yeah.
First.
Sure. Let me finish this first and then we can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that ended up, it was a good lesson on like the trade-offs of how to actually roll out these things or how to work when there's something like that, which to be clear to any Elm listeners, there's nothing like that. There's no big changes on the way or anything.
No. No, it's nice and settled down.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a funny story from, I was visiting this. Oh, you were there.
Yeah.
The company in Gothenburg.
Yeah. Webhuset.
So they use Elm a lot. And someone there was telling me they've been keeping an eye on all the performance metrics because they do a lot of e-commerce sites where getting the performance really intense is important for them. And he was saying that Elm has gotten faster, which is a little bit of a misquote because it's just like by not touching the virtual DOM library, it stayed the same speed. Whereas like the more other ones have touched it, it has gotten a little bit slower.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a funny result. But and to be fair, like a virtual DOM implementation is like so finicky where like every little detail interacts with the JavaScript virtual machine, where it's like, if you have 4 fields in an object and they ever appear not in exactly the same order in the text file, you're going to get de-optimized. And it's like figuring out all these sort of like ins and outs of what does a virtual machine like? Okay. And it's things that like that are pretty surprising that you wouldn't expect. Oh, I just put the name first in this case. And it's like, okay, your implementation's losing a bunch of speed now.
Yeah.
So I can see as the more you touch it, it's like, I don't know how you can like load it all into your head. And I mean, it takes like a focused month or something, depending on the project. So.
Yeah. For as few people as possible, I guess, because you can really focus.
Well, and I mean, there are techniques. I visited the Dart team many years ago now, but one of the things they had was a TV on the wall, and they had a performance graph, like a benchmark tests. And so it was just a graph of like how they were doing on their performance benchmarks as they did each patch. And so you could see like, oh, there was a performance regression with that change. And it seemed like a really powerful way to like make visible things that you might not notice otherwise. Where it's like, oh, we're just going along and suddenly the code we're generating is 3 times slower. it's like it's a crisis, but you might not even
notice.
Yeah, if you're just focused on the compiler tasks.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the WebKit team when they built Safari. Like they had this rule that you couldn't check in anything that made the test run slower. So if you did something that was slow, you had to speed up something else to balance it out.
To pay for it.
Yeah, and they apparently did that for quite a while. I mean, there's so many ways of approaching stuff like that.
And I think for me being a single individual who's working on it full time, I was never so sophisticated as that.
No, I mean, that's setting something like that up. It's its own project
just setting
as well.
It up.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, some people are really good at that. They do all the setups, have all the visualizers, but maybe they don't have time to think as deeply about the central problem either.
Well, but I always was a low-tech programmer, which I don't know if it comes from like the particular like professors who taught me functional stuff or just being from tight functional languages.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the tooling is, here's your error message and good luck. Good luck with that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate powerful tools and stuff like that, but there's something really nice about, it's me and the characters I type and I get a result back and I don't need tons of tools around it to get my job done.
Well, yeah, and when I see someone who has a really nice setup, it's like, okay, I can see. But I think it was just such a part of the education where it was like our exams would be like programming, but doing it on paper.
Yeah.
Where it's like you have to run it in your head and make sure it's right.
Yeah. I did done one or two, I think, of that as well. It's a special experience.
But I think, I look back on that and I'm happy that they were so odd in their insistence on doing it that way.
Yeah.
But,
so what kind of environment do you write code in these days? Or does it vary a lot? Or do you have like a standard setup that you use?
I just use Sublime Text and syntax highlighting.
Yeah, it's nice.
And I think I always struggle to get everything set up. So I'm just like, Clang will tell me, or GHC, the Haskell compiler will tell me.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways it's just about like getting acclimated. Because I think for our school, they had us like the whole first year, they had us programming in Nano.
Oh.
And so it was like an upgrade where I was like, oh, I use Emacs now. Yeah. So it was just like very much the whole like origin was in that kind of.
Yeah.
Here's your syntax highlighting.
Yeah. So. Wow. This is awesome.
But yeah. And I think besides that, but weirdly, I think that's part of why with the Elm error messages, I really wanted to make that terminal experience very special.
Yeah.
So one funny thing that I don't know if people necessarily notice is that the particular use of colors is very specifically chosen to draw your eye to certain parts.
Oh.
So I was just talking with someone who's Dutch, who wanted to get a Dutch translation of the error messages because he's teaching some young students there.
Yeah.
And one of the concerns I brought up legitimately was like, but I've actually written the sentences to like fall within the 80 characters
yes.
more beautifully.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how you translate that.
No.
Which it's a little bit silly, but.
Yeah, but it's silly, but it's also sort of essential in a way.
I think it's part of the experience. And I think, for a student who doesn't speak English very well, they'd rather just have it in Dutch than the perfect line breaks. But
yeah, sure.
But still, I'm like, can we do it in Dutch with the perfect line breaks too?
Yeah.
How long are your words again?
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things that, like, the right Dutch person could make a huge difference, like coming in and figuring out the right way of putting it. It's care about the details as well. It matters a lot too.
But yeah, the error messages are funny. So we had a whole discussion of like how could we make language packs, and it turns out it's tricky.
Yeah, I bet. So many layers to everything to do with language. I mean, there's an art to like saying no to stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. With this one, it's just like the technical aspects of it. Like in theory, it should be, here's a template where we fill in this spot with a number or a variable name. But the error messages are actually quite customized in that if you have two regions to underline, if they're on two different lines or on the same line, I'll actually give a different error message to accommodate that layout difference and make it clearer what's going on.
Yeah.
And so like there's a lot of conditionality to the error messages that's hard to capture in just like a template.
Yeah. How do you describe what the context actually is here?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't you almost argue that sort of the error messages are almost part of the language in itself? It's not so much that it's English, it's more of an Elm error message. Almost.
Well, and I think the guy I talked to, his approach is going to be like, he's going to take the compiler and go through and do it in Dutch to get an idea of like, once we have our two reference points and more people who kind of know the subtleties of like, if there was some kind of generic way to write these, what would it need to have?
Yeah.
Like, then we can think about that kind of stuff. But I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, of course.
And to go back to like being specific is like, he wants it in Dutch. Let's make it work in Dutch and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Solving specific cases, not the general ones all the time. I like it. So are you doing much Elm work these days, or sort of following it?
These days, yeah. So after around end of 2019, there was that moment of like, oh, there's no like career path here in doing it in the Silicon Valley, someone supporting your work in this sort of odd way.
Yeah.
And so since then, my attitude, I think my disposition is more of like a farmer's disposition in the sense that sometimes you have good years and sometimes you have bad years.
Yeah.
And when you have a good year, you don't say, yeah, things are going great. You say, I'm going to need this later.
Yeah.
And so that's how I really treated all the time that I was working with companies supporting my work, was like, these are the good years. The bad years are coming. And so after 2020, I kind of said, okay, I have set myself up such that I have time to really figure out how to set up an organization that can support this work on Elm in a good way.
Yeah.
So since then, I've been working on some more compiler stuff for Elm and for how do we think about bringing these kinds of typed functional ideas to databases or servers. And because I think another part of it for me is like, I think many people can relate to like in your own career, at some point you want to have some kind of career growth or bring in something new, and for me at some point it was like, I can write a good type inference algorithm, or, I just felt a little bit stuck in the boundaries of the project. And so it felt like a good point of like, okay, I'm facing this organizational challenge. I'm facing this like career path challenge. Like, how can I solve those problems in a good way?
Yeah.
And like with any language project, it takes longer than you,
of course,
than you plan at the beginning. And, if you add in moving to Denmark and learning Danish and
a few other little things,
it adds a few delays here.
Yeah. But so you got a sort of an organization in place, and then you went and did the deep research project, sort of.
Well, essentially my thinking was, I've saved for some number of bad years, let's say.
Yep.
How do I use those years to create a technical thing that can actually be sustainable?
Yeah.
And so like with Elm, I think it can be supported with consulting and consulting and like the way those companies supported me, like patronage kind of stuff. But I wanted to see if there was some other path as well.
Yeah.
I think, to be fair, though, part of it was like I'd worked so hard on this project for so many years that I kind of wanted to, for myself, write the last part that I needed to write to prove, like, as a, like, think of it in a PhD, like doing the thesis that synthesizes all those learnings.
I was thinking in that direction.
Yeah, and so there was this actually weird moment, maybe a year ago now, quite a while ago, where I'd been working so hard, and suddenly I like didn't feel the same urgency. And I was like, wait, did something bad happen? Like, why don't I feel like anxious or...
Yeah.
And I realized, like, oh, the thing I needed to prove to myself, like, can I do this technical project? I had proved it. And then the steps from there were like, okay, well, now I need to figure out how to
wrap it up,
share it with other people, which is its own project.
Yeah,
but
of course.
It was for kind of the emotional arc of working on Elm and being a public figure and having this relationship of, I have some enjoyment of the work. And is it for me? Is it for the language? Is it for the people using the language? So I've been, the last few years, it's been a challenge to not be in this sort of comfortable Silicon Valley structures. Yeah. But as I'm nearing the end of this era, I'm feeling very enthusiastic and happy. And if anyone else is thinking of moving to Denmark, I say go for it. Maybe it'll take a few years longer than you expect to get back to where you started, but
but you get a nice farm as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear it. There's a rooster.
I hear it in the background. It's a fantastic sort of background illustration.
Okay, there's a funny story with that. So the farm next to us, it's run by a lady who, she runs a bed and breakfast, and they have a bunch of cows. And so she has a website so people can book their stays. And she's older, so it's like she's not on Instagram. She's not a tech lady. She's a country girl. Yeah. So my wife, who's also a programmer, will go like help her with her like booking system and her website. Yeah. And our neighbor's so grateful. She'll like offer farm goods in exchange. So the chickens were actually like, my wife fixed up her website and she was like, do you want 4 chickens?
Wow.
And my wife was just like, this is perfect. Yeah. This is the perfect.
The best thing ever.
Yeah.
Also getting paid in chickens for web development. That's so awesome in itself.
Yeah. So we're still new to, doing the gardening and doing this kind of stuff, but it's been quite exciting to start to get food from the garden.
Oh yeah, of course.
I didn't expect it to really be really good, but it's a shock.
And I mean, it feels like, I don't know if it's, when I say balance, I mean, it's something in the moment, it's always moving a bit, but it feels like a really great balance between, deep technical research work and then, we're out fixing our own garden and growing our own things. And
I think for sure, just like there's a slowness out here that I really connect with. Yeah. But I think also it's interesting to see that there's all these, at least where we live, there's all these like small business people who are doing contracting. So it'll be like a guy who will set up your garden or movers and and like just a relationship to work, which is like, I'm not trying to change the world or take over the world or be this huge entity. It's like we help each other out through our little businesses. And in the village we're in, it's like all the people who have companies like help build the school. So like you'll see the guys who are working on the new building will be the bricklayer company that's just down the road. And so I really value being around people whose relationship to like commerce and business is such a of the place kind of attitude.
Yeah, it's grounded.
And like, and this kind of farmer mentality of a good year. Yeah. You don't celebrate then. You celebrate in the bad year when you're able to actually make use of that money.
Yeah, and nobody's looking to 10x anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Next year I'm going to have 8 chickens and then 16 and then 32. No.
I mean, if it's up to the chickens, I don't know.
Oh yeah, true. don't discredit the chickens, of course.
But yeah, we have just a rooster and 3 hens,
Mm-hmm.
and the eggs already are going quickly. I was surprised, like for some breeds it can be like almost an egg a day.
Oh, wow.
Or like for the max ones, for a chicken, I think it can give you like 300 eggs per year.
Wow.
So it's
insane.
Like you only get a couple, and it's like, okay, enough omelets, enough quiche. Like, I'm good.
Exactly.
But that's also been something cool living out here is we have a young son,
mm-hmm.
and like for him getting to like have a relationship, my wife and I are both programmers, so I think we're kind of on the one end of the spectrum where it's like, is this technology stuff, like, to what extent is it hurting us?
Yeah.
And to what extent am I actively doing that to someone, And so seeing him like get excited to go find the eggs and essentially like learn the skill of not having anything like particularly entertaining to do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're going to, he's like, I'm going to go make a bonfire. So wherever he goes, he's collecting sticks to pile up.
Yes.
Bonfire.
Yeah. Yeah, then you learn about fire safety as well. It's all good.
But I think that whole path going from San Francisco and like finding a place that was suitable for me as a person has been really, I mean, I'll say, I think ultimately I'm going to be able to produce much better work for much longer.
Yeah.
Even though I appreciate that, for people who are enthusiastic about Elm, it probably would have been nice to not have to have such a long path to getting that set up.
But still, I mean, it might have looked better on paper or looked more exciting on paper or what have you.
But I don't want to discount, that there's a cost.
No, of course. And for someone else, it's a different trade-off between things. That's the best way to go.
Because someone may hear the chickens in the background and be like, not for me.
I'm so glad for my very small apartment.
I need to be in the city. I need to. Yeah, we have a friend like that who's like, I can visit for like a day, but where's the cinema? Where's the bars? Where
are all the people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes I'm a different person on different days as well, so it's hard to it's hard enough to figure myself out. Yeah, maybe that's a good spot to wrap up for today. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Evan.
Of course, thank you.
Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee. ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.